Welcome, everyone. Today's Monday program I'm having to conduct here in splendid solitude due to the local conditions, or actually the conditions that seem to be prevailing on Australia's east coast, which is a lot of heavy precipitation. So actually out where I am, Mullumbimby, the roads are actually some areas are sort of, you can't drive. And so even though this morning there actually was access to where I am, it was a little bit risky, and you never know what could happen. So we decided to cancel the face-to-face part of it. Of course, we can do it online, which we're doing now. The only change will really be just that the meditation, in that we don't have a live audience here and we don't have a live group. It will just be the Treasury of Blessings chant together with then 15 minutes of sitting. So other than that, the program will run as normal. So we'll basically run from 5 to 7 approximately. Someone's saying they can't see my image. Not that that's a great loss, but is that the case for everybody? Because according to all is good. Yeah, all is good. Can see, can see, can see. Okay. So that must be something. That must be something to do with your device in your end. I'm sorry. Okay. So today we're going to continue. Good. I'm showing up. Good. Better. Today we're going to continue. Now, last time, and someone was a bit confused about that. Last time there was a little bit of a change in program. So where we were here, out in at Pancha Sirisha, that we actually showed a movie. But then from where I was, we did a little sort of a little extra program on just Madhyamika, which is so important. Madhyamika is this beautiful statement that we can't hold on to anything. We as sentient beings, we fail in that we try to hold on to self and the object. And it's not just that it's a bad idea in terms of our own peace of mind, it's that it's actually it's a flawed assumption. We actually can't find anything to hold on to, neither objectively or internally. And this will actually come up in today's discussion, possibly, if we get that far. But that's a very important message, really, because that's where actually we can see that all our attempts to limit the mind and all our attempts to limit reality so it fits according to us, and all our attempts to pigeonhole reality, they're flawed by the very nature of actually being constructed by a dualistic mind that perceives of a self and perceives of an other. So you see, there's both ontological and epistemological foundations for this essentially challenging our assumptions. So this is a very good thing to do because it actually opens us up rather than retreating into, you could say, dogmatic positions or rigid psychological attitudes. It actually shows the flaw of doing that. And not only the flaw in terms of, like I said, peace of mind, but there's actually no foundation for it. We can actually analyze how our assumptions around the external reality are flawed. They necessarily are based on assumptions, and similarly also with regards to the internal. So this is such an important point, really. And as much as Madhyamika might be understood as something that's a bit intimidating, because in the classical presentation it refutes a lot of Indian positions, it essentially spells out the most beautiful simplicity. And so that's where, don't be fooled by appearances when you study Madhyamika. It really leads to a very, very beautiful place. And implicitly, this is also why we're doing the present study, which is about deconstructing the ways in which we approach our perceptions. So here we're talking a little bit about categories that operate when we have perceptions, and we'll continue looking at that. So last time we were talking a little bit about ontological and epistemological objects and how that applies in meditation, and how essentially what we're doing in the Buddhist project is not so much we're analyzing the objects, we're more analyzing how the subject constructs the object. And that's where we trip ourselves up, and that's where we go wrong. So we have plenty of you could say, science around the object, and also to some extent objective observation of how we interact with the object. But what we're actually looking at here is more how the subject constructs the object. So this is what we're going to be looking at here today, basically two ways of regarding the so-called object. So Steven says there are two ways of regarding the object, either as one, column 2 in contact with column 1, which means basically I and form, right? That's how we can see of it. There's us, the I something, right? I see something. Or column 2 in contact with column 3, which is then where we have a perception. There's a form, and then we generate a perception. So one is about the external object, and one is about the internal experience. So this is the distinction between an object, column, which is sitting in column 2, right? The field of the object, in the sense of needing to rely on contact with the sensory capacity. That's column 1, the I. And an object, column 2, in the sense of being known through contact with the integrative function of awareness, column 3. So that's what happens. Now, Vasubandhu does note, however, two different senses for how to understand column 2 content, meaning the form. He says that the sensory domains or fields in column 2, that's the dhatus 7 to 11. Okay, that's basically form, sound, smell, taste, and touch. Basically what we call the 5 senses, right? They are sometimes called objects when referring to their dependence on the capacity to process them. So that's the guys over here. There's I, and the object of the eye is the form. The object of the ear is sound, etc. This is when one wishes to talk about the sensory field emphasizing contact being made with the so-called capacity for sensory processing called the eye, and so on, those visibles and the other 4 senses. So that's how we talk about what does the eye do, what does the ear do. It basically operates within these. It basically operates in conjunction with these objective fields, right? This is a way of acknowledging that what we call a sensory thing, a sensory occurrence, that has something to do with what we might call the seemingly physical capacity to process sensory information. Yeah, that's generally how we would say this is how we know things. But of course, Vasubandhu then goes on to say that the same sensory domains, column 2, are called epistemological objects, alambana, with respect to their contact with the integrative function, the vijnana, or the knowing, of column 3, dhatus 13 to 17. That's when we talk about perception. That's why we would say there's a subjective dimension that takes place, right? We're seeing something, but we go a little bit further than just saying I see something, but rather we're saying I'm having a perception of something. The moment that we say having a perception, whether it's then visual, auditory, olfactory, gustatory, or tactile, we're already beginning to see perception. That's already beginning to smell of subjectivity, right? That's where it's a bit like we say, I seem to be seeing something, or, there's already the interpreter of experience is already being drawn into it. That's then where we call this epistemological object, and this is where Steven last time he introduced the notion that we can have a solid sense of a reality existing out there independent of what we might think or not think about it, which is the ontological object. And then there is what we think about it and how we perceive things. And this is then what we're looking at now, the epistemological object. We could basically, ontology is what there is, and epistemology is how we know what there is. So the epistemology comes with the subjective dimension, the knower, and you could say the science of knowing. Vasubandhu clarifies that the same content, again coming back to column 2, is differently named according to which column of contact one wants to focus on. Contact with either column 1 or column 3. Yeah. So we, for example, say, "Oh yeah, there's the white wall out there," but then there's also the notion of perception of white wall. So these two, they operate with the same object, but there's a different flavor. So that's where we then look at here when we talk about the indriya or the I, the faculty or the capacity. Then this can be on the basis of, or rather, yeah, that's that's the capacity. But the main thing is column 2, where we have then, let's see, the white wall. Then that can go to that can be an object. That can be an object of the eye, or it can be then the perception that is known. So this is where it's a bit confusing, but the indriya, which is then basically the faculty, it can then operate with a sense of object. So that's the vishaya. But then there's also the same thing, the same wall, right, which is the object of the eye, is also the perception of the knower, and that's where it's alambana, vijnana. So this is very interesting, because that really is where you could say that's a big difference in some of the ways that you could say, presume to understand the phenomenal world. We can understand the phenomenal world through an attempt, an ambition to know the ontological reality, to know what is actually there. But that's where the Buddhists, they would say, well, we wouldn't presume that we can know what's actually there, but we can operate with the notion that we're perceiving what's actually there. That is not to say that, you say, the various scientific traditions haven't taken this into consideration, but there's a big difference in the, you could say, emphasis or presumptions of what we could do and what constitutes valid knowing. So this is important. So that's where these two, on the basis of form, with its hues and shapes, it operates as the form that's the object of the eye, or the scene that's the object of the visual awareness, the perception. Concretely, in experience, a gray rectangle is a gray rectangle. But a rose, for example, in deep dependence on our capacity to process our awareness of it, might be visual or olfactory, right? If the nose is involved, then that is channel 3 processing. And then if we sort of reach out and get pricked on the thorns of the rose, it becomes tactile. So in that sense, rose already becomes more complex. Nevertheless, we're still talking about simply just objects and how they can be experienced. So alambana, which is then the object or field as something known, perceived, is called the epistemological object, alambana. Generally speaking, Buddhist practice lineages are almost exclusively interested in this sense of the epistemological objects. And this is, of course, not just in the case of practice lineages, but also on the basis of theory. You say the whole phenomenology, which is what Abhidharma is operating with that from a critical sense of wishing to understand what constitutes our reality. So Steven continues to use the example of looking at a gray rectangle. They are not so interested. This is again these phenomenologists or the Buddhist lineages or the Buddhists altogether. They're not so interested in going into an analysis of what physical or material stuff that grayness is made out of. Okay, just to make this even more clear, there you have a gray rectangle. So rather, they're interested in the visual pattern that is present for us in a moment of seeing with respects to how it gets integrated into experience. An epistemological object is an object constituted in a moment of knowing. By knowing, we can also understand a moment of experience. And these experiential moments are not at all necessarily confined to occasions of formal meditation. They, of course, are any given moment that we're analytically, or rather we're aware of that what we're experiencing is just that, perception. In fact, when Buddhists talk about shamatha, with or without an object or focus, they use the word for epistemological object, alambana, or tsenma in Tibetan. Shamatha is classified as either with or without an epistemological object, what we call tsenche or tsenme. So with or without alambana, with or without epistemological object. This is a meditational object. That's a field of awareness that is constituted or that comes about during or through meditation. We might say a generality that when we do a visualization, we can refer to what arises in our mind as a meditational object. Now, in this case, we can simply it can be gray square, it can also be a flower, it can be a river, whatever it might be. So something arises in our mind and we're just having that notion. That is the perception. Now that we've made how we experience the object, now that we've made the distinction between the two senses of object, we can say that, according to Abhidharma analysis, one does not entertain questions concerning the sense in which this gray rectangle may exist, apart from my moment of knowing it or when I am not contacting it. So that's the thing. We have this gray rectangle over on the left side, right? And then we might say, what is it really? And that's a bit like just going after the object. But we would sometimes say that's a bit like when you throw a stone after a dog, it sort of starts looking at the stone that was thrown at it. If you throw a stone at a lion, it doesn't really give a damn about the stone that was thrown at it. It looks around and saying, who threw it? So that's where we're more interested in we recognize that what we're having here is a subjective perception of an object. And as interesting as it might be, we also realize that this perception is constructed through the subject. So we're much more interested in the constructing subject. Now, I have to remember also, this is not because we're blind to the phenomenal world and don't want to improve it, but it's because we want to get to the bottom of suffering. We want to get to the bottom of why is the subject discombobulated? Why is the subject not well? And that's where we want to get to the bottom of the perceiver rather than try to understand the perceived object. So, it's like the story, Steven continues, told by the Buddha of a man who had an arrow in his eye. Before the man would allow the doctor to remove the arrow, where were they from? And the reply was, do you want the arrow out or not? That's actually a very sort of charming rendition of this story, which you find in the Pali Canon and elsewhere. The point here is to overcome our experiential myopia, to get a wider perspective, to use our inherent wisdom mind in a precise way, one that aids us in going beyond suffering. To the frustration of Western philosophers, The living Buddhist traditions, which have a very precise and subtle way of talking about experience, are rather shockingly disinterested in the issues of externality and materiality. Of course, there are texts that explore these topics here and there, but they don't seem to have been popular, especially in the texts on meditation and in practice lineages. Well, they're more, yes, of course, Stephen is right, but there's more that in meditation texts, and when you come to the when we talk about practice lineages, yes, we are talking about meditation practice. There we are definitely more about applying particular remedies, whereas we do in fact have, you could say, the theoretical physics or the theoretical component that does, to some extent, analyze the phenomenal world. And actually, Abhidharma does do that in places. There are whole sections in the Abhidharma which are about how the universe is put together and the way that it sort of understands this in terms of the contemporary Indian worldview. Anyway, it's true. As far as, and also what we're particularly interested in, really what we're looking at is the cause of suffering, and that's where we're looking at how the subject misses the nature of the object, and it does so on the basis of its own subjective confusion. There's nothing wrong with the object, it's the way that we engage with it. So let's recap. Okay. Column 3, the integrative function, has a direct relationship with column 2, but it is no more direct than column 1. So that means that there's direct relationship with form, just slightly different. How is there contact between column 2 and column 3, and between column 1 and column 3? How can you have an integrative relationship with an experiential relationship with, say, a rose? What is commonly said is that the emitting region called rose, the visual field, is a physical thing. We have something in our eyes called rods and cones. It's a filter, isn't it? We know that butterflies see flowers differently. Their capacity for visual experience is different from that of humans, right? They have a different filtering process. This doesn't necessarily correspond to the object. The emitting region is filtered. So this is again where we realize that our particular subjective capacity is somewhat constructed according to our particular, should we say, disposition, butterfly disposition or human disposition. What gets through this filter? The hue and the shape, which in our previous example is gray and rectangular for us, was filtered by the rods and cones in the eyes, right? If we were flies, the filter would be different. A fly's column 2 will be different from a human's column 2 on the basis of their particular capacity. The point is this: the same emitting region, column 2, is filtered differently because of column 1, which then needs to be further processed and integrated, column 3, for a visual experience to arise. So there we are, fluttering towards a flower, and we see something very different as butterflies, and we form very different visual perceptions than if we were a human. We have different eyes with different rods and cones, and as such, butterfly visual perception is different from human visual perception. So the point is this: the same imaging region is filtered differently because of volume 1, which then needs to be further processed and integrated column 3 for a visual experience to arise. Even though we have the filtered gray rectangle, column 2, and the filters of sensory capacity are working, column 1, it's still possible not to have an experience of seeing. So we might look at this very exciting object here, and we might see it, but then also we might not see it. There could be an interruption or dysfunction in column 3, something wrong with the integrative function. So we might be hallucinating, we might be seeing that and seeing something that we generate a different experience of. Okay. So here's a question. So following the subject, object, perceived and perceived, the often mentioned example of whether a tree falling in the forest with no one there, who can perceive sound? We can't know it if it actually produces a sound. So Abhidharma asserts this with all known phenomena. Let's just say the thing about Abhidharma, okay, let's just get it clear. The Abhidharma doesn't really worry too much about external or not external phenomena. So they might remain agnostic on this one here. They might not lean towards whether or not this is heard or not. They might, in fact, if there is an externally existing world, they would say, oh yeah, well, nobody hears it, but they must be making some crashing sound. It's a little bit different once you go into the Yogacaryan tradition, where they would say that indeed, without a mind to know it, there's no sound that could be known. Of course, it would be known to the possums or whatever that might be out there. They would have an experience of that. But if there really was nobody there, they would say that then there's no basis for any perception as such. So the issue of sound doesn't come up. Then you would say, hey, wait a minute, don't we all experience the same phenomenal world? We all seem to be then hallucinating. Well, yes, but we're hallucinating slightly different. And depending on where we're hearing the sound from and so forth, we'll all hear it differently. But what we do talk about is that we have shared perception. So then on the basis of our particular karma, or the particular conditions that have brought us into this experience we have, then we in fact are talking about how it all is in the mind, but we all have a mind that's sharing a given perception. So your question is very valid and comes up a lot. But again, I think for the time being here in the Abhidharma context, we actually remain agnostic on the issue of external phenomena. We don't take sides in it. Examining the nature of experience, phenomenology, and the Abhidharma. Experience and remembering that experience. Now, this is why I actually bothered to make this little illustration here. It says, using the example of the difference between experience and remembering that experience. Using the example of the gray rectangle, we now have an idea of what channel 1 processing might be. Next, you're invited to close your eyes and see if you can bring into presence with a relaxed and stable focus your memory of your former experience called gray rectangle. Okay? Do you remember that gray rectangle? There it is. Okay. So you remember that, right? Okay, let's just remember that. Okay. We're all remembering the gray rectangle. Then open your eyes again and focus precisely at the gray rectangle for about 30 seconds. We're probably not going to do that, but we're sort of heading in that way. Just focus on the gray rectangle for a while. Okay. The mind will wander. Bring it back to the gray rectangle. Again, close your eyes and calmly bring to presence the gray rectangle. Okay? Now remember the gray rectangle, close your eyes. All of this is about the gray rectangle, right? But there is a difference. The claim in this exercise concerning the gray rectangle is that there are two different channels working. When our eyes are open and focused on the target, it is channel 1. And when our eyes are closed, we're bringing into presence the gray rectangle as a memory. It is channel 6, right? The mind. We could say it's channel 6, and we could say it's also channel, what is it again? 12. Where you could say it's the mind dimension, but then again, what's being brought into the mind, the object of that is then the gray rectangle, right? But it's in the domain then of this sixth channel. Oh, basically, yes, that is right. So we're not talking just, well, that's right. We're talking all three columns, basically channel 6, yeah? So that's where that's taking place. Okay, so there's a big difference then between seeing the object and remembering it. That's where we sometimes, we fail. Our thoughts become very real for us when in fact they are just memories. So this is not just a, you could say, trivial piece of information, but this is actually something that's rather, you could say, mind-opening in the sense that it enables us to begin to differentiate clearly. We all, of course, we already knew that, but still to be reminded that what we're seeing in our mind's eye is not real. You know, we think it's real, but we should ask ourselves: is it really real? You know. Here's another exercise. Keeping your eyes open, simply ask yourself the following questions. Do you remember having your eyes open and actually having looked at the gray rectangle? Okay, good. Now with your eyes closed, can you bring into awareness having seen that gray rectangle? Are those two experiences of gray rectangle the same or different? Okay, so we know that we've been looking at it, and we also know that we could remember it. Are these two the same or different? Okay, now we're going to take this into the into the realm of phenomenology. So we're going to get a little bit sort of a little bit of a dose of phenomenology. We should remember that Steven studied with Herbert Günther. For some of us who came to Buddhism in the 1970s and 80s, we remember Günther as someone who did some extraordinary translations, particularly of Longchenpa's works, but other works of significance and philosophy, particularly from the Nyingma tradition, but who very much employed German philosophical language, which left quite a few of us a bit struggling as we were sort of making our way through what arguably could be some very accurate translations. Arguably, later translators have found it wasn't all that, but it certainly looked, it wasn't all that great, but it did look very convincing. And certainly for my own part, reading Herbert Günther's translation of Longchenpa's what's it called, Kindly Bent to Ease Us, which was finding rest in the nature of mind, but it being the only translation at the time, we sort of willingly embraced Günther's phenomenological Husserlian Hegelian language, but it was a bit of a mouthful. Anyway, so Steven studied with Günther, and of course also would in general have probably been exposed to phenomenology from elsewhere. But anyway, he here brings in then phenomenology as we have it in the Western context, and he says there's a wonderful little book by Edmund Husserl called The Phenomenology of Internal Time Consciousness. The book describes a concrete study using hearing, what we call here channel 2, and remembering what has been heard, what we call mind, or channel 6. For finding a way to describe very precisely subtle distinctions between a present moment of hearing a piece of music, channel 2, and remembering that one heard a piece of music, right? So there it is. We're listening to I Heard It Through the Grapevine, and then we're remembering, oh yeah, I once heard a song called I Heard It Through the Grapevine, yeah? So now the Buddha and Vasubandhu knew the variety of ways in which we experience reality are subtle, deep, and profound. They are difficult to understand at the level that they occur. Common language we use in our common non-meditative, non-quiet way of getting through the day seem to diminish our capacity to precisely focus on the deep and subtle aspects of experience. And it is this habit of blocked focus that determines what we call reality. So we're not particularly accurate participants in our reality because of our disquiet or our sort of speed or whatever it is, our essentially obscured or perverted way of relating to reality. It simply lacks the proper, you could say, optics. Husserl was interested in finding a language to describe our experiences at a deep level. He was interested in not talk about things, but the things themselves. That is a radical way of attending to how we actually perceive by using language that is attuned to those phenomena. This approach is referred to as phenomenology, and there are a number of contemporary Western philosophies, such as Evan Thompson, who exploring Husserl's approach in the context of Buddhist thought. Evan Thompson is actually quite significant. He co-wrote what's it called, the embodied mind with Francesco Varela. I think there was a third person also, but he's still with us. He's still alive, and he's one of these people who's engaged really in the bridging between Western neuroscience and Buddhism. More involved with the theoretical and philosophical component than, say, for example, Richard Davidson, which is more on the sort of the application of meditation and so on. And we also have other phenomenologists which really are important in the Western context. And of course, this influenced hugely the whole 20th century's relationship to science and so on, to begin to actually extract science from just being a purely objectivist phenomenon into taking into account the subject of engagement. So we also have what we have from the structuralists, Saussure and others, Wittgenstein and so on, the whole notion of how we understand reality through what we call signified and signifier, and what Wittgenstein also referred to as language games, when we begin to speak about the being able to distinguish between what is the signified and the signifier and so forth. So this is where you can say Western epistemology or science around what we know developed around these themes that we're talking about now. And they've, of course, always taken place, but here we're more talking about how it evolved in the 20th century. Husserl was not primarily interested in how objects may exist materially, a question scientists might be interested in, nor was he interested in problems of externality, that is, how objects might exist out there, the tree in the forest, when I'm not experiencing them. Husserl used the Greek term epoché, a word meaning to put in abeyance or to put in brackets, to put aside. Basically, I would do like this, right? So we have all our sort of ideas, but we're trying to actually understand the process of how we're experiencing things themselves. It's a more naked, direct way of knowing our reality. Yeah? So we're basically making this epoché in the sense we're pushing aside all what is external to the phenomenon and trying to understand the phenomenon itself. This, of course, is tricky. But anyway, to put in brackets, to put aside all our theories about perception and to enter more directly into a subtle and deep experience of the perceptions themselves. Notice we're talking about perceptions, right? We're not talking about the objects necessarily. He claimed to have discovered a way to show how one could move from imprecise reflections to a more precise experiential language regarding our experiences, and he developed ways for demonstrating that kind of precision. Most importantly for our explorations, Husserl was interested in suspending judgment, epoché, in learning how to remove the sedimented habits of theory, of imprecise language, bit by bit, so that we might come to the experiences themselves. Okay, good for Husserl. But this is a very, very valid project. If our memory of the rectangle is channel 6, imagination, is that also the 8th consciousness? No, that would still follow into the sixth consciousness. See, if you begin to like or dislike that rectangle, that's the 7th consciousness, which is what we call the afflicted mind. And the 8th consciousness is more just the notion of duality, myself in relation to the phenomena. So that's the basic condition of what we call the alaya vijnana. So that's you could say the very basis for our whole confusion. So we're still just quite simply operating on a very, you could say, practical level on channel 6. So in memory, are we just remembering the last time we remembered it? I guess so. Yes, that's what's implied here. And it generates more than that actually, because it generates a generic image. You know, let's say I say shoe. Well, you've seen lots of shoe, but there's a place where there's a generic image of shoe that just comes to mind. You know, beach, sky. It's not last time we looked at the sky. It's not necessarily particular memories, but we have what we call generic images that come up. So we know what a shoe, a beach, a sky, a car, and all these things are. So this also falls into the category of memory. So, sorry, I didn't quite get what you said about the main concern of Abhidharma. Did you say that it isn't concerned with external phenomena and how it arises, but only with the perceiver? Pretty much. Certainly in the study that we're doing right now, which is about the skandhas, ayatanas, and the dhatus, then that is the main focus. The experience of perception, the experience of the subject. And that's where then they are, it's not that they're not concerned, but they are, like I said, agnostics. They don't really take a position with regards to whether or not phenomena exist externally or not. And this stands in opposition to then the Yogacharyans. So we would say the Vibhashikas and the Sutrantikas, if we're looking at the 4 tenets, they are more asserting an external reality. The Yogacharyans, they would say, nope, it's all entirely, the whole thing is all labeling by the mind. And the Madhyamikans, they would again be completely agnostic. They are like thoroughly agnostic with regards to all relative phenomena. But then again, some Madhyamikans would say, well, relatively, phenomena can be explained in various ways. Sometimes as externally existing phenomena, sometimes as phenomena of the mind. So there's a few different ways of approaching this. The bottom line here really, and what we are interested in, is just highlighting how we, in terms of our experience, that we operate with what Husserl then is referring to as imprecise language. And this is what we want to get to the bottom of. Okay, now we're getting, now we're involving René Descartes. Cartesian split, dualism, not differentiation. Descartes famously said that there are 2 separate things, res. One is called extended things, res extensa, which makes up the so-called objective aspects of our experience constituting the world of things that are seemingly out there. So we could say the material world. The other is subjective, thinking stuff, res cogitans. This duality is known as the Cartesian split, basically the split between mind and matter, right? And it has been regarded as a powerful statement on the dual nature that dominates all human knowledge. So we then have, basically from the time of Descartes onwards, 2 camps. One that is concerned with the material, with matter, and that came then to become the thrust of our sciences, that they just were concerned really with the objectifiably, intangibly measurable, the tangible and the measurable, the quantifiable, right? That's the objective science that focuses on matter. And at the time of Descartes, then, the whole notion of the subjective was then really the domain of the soul, God, and what is intangible, and that then fell outside of the scope of the materialist science, the mechanistic science. And that's why we end up then with a very successful materialistic science that's, at one point was thought to be able to know everything. And then the domain of the conscious, intangible domain of the mind, that was then at the time of Descartes was sort of relegated to the church. And the church didn't operate on the same premises as the materialist science, and wasn't able to, basically didn't have the same success, and it was also not very good at responding to the very sort of the very tough questions that was put to it by materialist science, and in its inability to explain what is intangible according to the science of tangibility, it was basically invalidated. And that's why we have nowadays this sort of notion that, the whole thing about what is consciousness, what is soul, what is God, and all of that, that's essentially associated with dogma and ignorant presumptions. This is a very important split, really, as in terms of understanding where we've ended up with our modern science that really just focuses on what is objective and tangible. So this duality, known as the Cartesian split, is then basic to these two spheres, really, of the human knowledge. Stephen goes on to say the Cartesian split has been quite influential in the development of the material sciences in the West. It represents an altogether different way of understanding direct knowing. If we run this Cartesian split through the same channel model we have been using, we could say that the split removes channel 6 completely from channels 1 to 5. Okay, we got channel 6 down here. Whoop, that's cut off from the other 5. These all have to do with, you could say, fields or objects that are tangible. This down here, nah, not tangible. So then channels, so if we run the complete okay, yeah, I'm just going to read. I'm going to read that again. If we run this Cartesian split through the same channel mode we have been using, we could say that this split removes channel 6 completely from channels 1 to 5, or more accurately, we could say that column 2 and channels 1 to 5 make out the outer stuff that science claims to objectively study as something separate from us. Then channel 6 and column 3 make up this thinking stuff that we call the subject, right? So we have basically the scope of channel 2 and basically these first 5, and particularly then the material science would be interested in these here, the objects of perception, and the Abhidharma would be, that would make up the subjective dimension. So when we have this mind and matter split, these here constitute matter, right? And these here, all that here, as well as the perceptions, they constitute mind. This dualistic approach seems to assert that there are two separate domains that then interact. One should note that there is a difference between dualism and differentiation. Differentiation or variety means that at the level of experience, things are not uniformly and continuously the same. Differentiation is what we're trying to develop with the Abhidharma. So we're not trying to make a split between mind and matter as such. We're more trying to understand, you say, the differentiations that constitute our experience. So we're interested in understanding the elements or the aspects that constitute our experience, and that's where we're interested in this differentiation. So we're not so much interested in this particular split. In the case of Descartes, this actually was seen as part of the Enlightenment, where actually science was set free, because until then science had to somewhat comply with the church, because in the absence of this split that Descartes then proposed, then everything was seen as God's creation. And so science couldn't really do a whole lot, because they had their hands tied, having to conform with everything being the creations of the Lord and so forth. There was a lot of things where they had to abide by the dogma of the church, which left sort of science pretty inept and not really science. What really set science free then was Descartes' liberation in the terms of the split meant that you could begin to you could still view you could say the whole phenomenal world of the objective dimension as God's creation, but you are also free to basically just study that and understand that. And that's where this was then understood in terms of just the mechanics, completely divested from the notion of soul and consciousness. And that's where then there was the notion that all phenomena, and that also includes all living creatures actually that weren't human, they were seen as just being mechanistic phenomena. So we talk about mechanistic reductionism, basically from the point, well, that's sometimes a derogatory term, but it basically means that we understand the scope of science is then this, what can be known objectively. And so that's where then science was free basically to go ahead and begin to explore this dimension without necessarily having to conform with any dogmas of the church. And then essentially everything that falls into channel 6 was then the domain of the church, and that's then where there was peace. The church did their business and the scientists could do their business. So that's where we talk about this Cartesian split or duality. Okay, any questions about this? Okay, we have a few minutes left. Maybe I'll just read the first section here. It sort of comes in bite-sized portions, doesn't it? Yeah, let's just take that first little paragraph. How Husserl's mode of investigation heals dualistic approaches. Husserl's method of investigation can be thought to have healed this Cartesian split, or at least have put it into suspension. Husserl said that at the level of experience, we can never find an actual separate distinction between thinking stuff and extended stuff, meaning our construction of the perceived object and the actual object itself. They're entangled. What we find in experience as our experiences are experiences. As such, experience does not come with a label of internal or external. On the level of experience, for example, when we are actually in touch with that gray rectangle, channel 1, the question of what it is made of or what is going to be after, we are not looking at it, never arises. Oh yeah, the question of what it's made out of, or what is going to be after we're not looking at it, never arises. So that's also where we're not really concerned about the tree falling in the empty forest. Both Husserl and the Abhidharmikas were interested in analyzing the qualities of different kind of perceptual objects with regards to which channel they were constituted by. Do the Abhidharmikas deny the possibility of anything existing externally? No, they are agnostic. They set it aside. They said it has little to do with learning how to lead a compassionate life. Well, that's, I guess so. I don't know if I would. That's with all respects to Stephen, I would say that's a little bit of a facile sort of to draw that. Yes, Stephen is right, because the moment that we begin to have some idea of the constructed nature of our perceptions, this leads to a greater openness. We have less of what Stephen calls fixing. We become less rigid, and that does actually lead to a more compassionate life, for sure. It also leads to a more accurate understanding of our reality. So it both sort of operates on an ontological and also on an epistemic level. So in that sense, the Abhidharma project is about understanding reality. You could say scientifically, objectively, validly, but yes, definitely in the context of applying this within our own experience, and not just as a dry theory. It is what opens up to less fixity, and it actually leads to greater, more open-minded, more tender relationship with the world at large. And this, of course, also is what then leads to less suffering. So yes, so Stephen is absolutely right, but I can't help myself wanting to sort of interject a little bit of commentary there. All right. I think if there are no questions, then we'll just do, I think we'll do a little bit of a, okay, let's see if there was something coming up here. So Abhidharma agrees. So Abhidharma agrees to this statement: human knowledge is limited to experience. Yes. Depends how we would define knowledge. And the Abhidharma's project, being conventional knowledge to some extent, or initially, it is limited then to experience. But the thing is also, Abhidharma, like the rest of Buddhism, is ultimately about knowledge that extends beyond what is objectifiable and what is known by the conceptual mind. So right now we are dealing with the conceptual mind, and that if we define that as our the scope, the conceptual knowledge, then it is limited to experience. But we are actually also going to be venture into human knowledge as what goes beyond concepts. And that's where we're also going to go beyond conventional experience. So you could say experience by an ordinary sentient being and experience by what we call a sublime being is different. And so human knowledge need not be limited just to an ordinary human. The human could also be a sublime being, in which case it goes beyond ordinary dualistic experience. So the short answer is yes and no. Okay. Haha. Okay. So we'll just, did I remember? Let's see here. It's too messy. I'll spare you of looking into my file. What's it called? My file manager. I'll just chant the verses of dedication. Let's see here. By this merit, may all attain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. From the ocean of samsara, may all beings be free. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen, may it never fail, but grow and flourish ever more and more. Okay, 2-minute break. Then I'll say something about meditation, and then we'll do some meditation. I was hoping you'd forget that. Okay. You said you would bring some photos of you and Steven to class. Please share him with us in class so we can continue to celebrate him throughout this study. Okay. Well, look, I'll bring a photo of him and myself, and also there's probably some nice photos of him out there. He's a very handsome man, actually. So yes, I'll bring them to class next time. Yeah, I can't get away with empty promises, it seems. Okay. I promise to deliver. Okay. So, 2-minute break. So someone saying, thank you for giving the hint of Woolston teaching Longchenpa. Very good. Yeah, I'd like to once again reiterate that, which is, if you contact maitrikara.org.uk, I think, you can participate in Woolston Fletcher's teachings on finding rest in the nature of mind. I'll put that up. Okay, there we go. Can you see this? I don't think you can. This is me and Steven. I'll try to get that in there next time. Just looking it up. Okay. So, a little bit about meditation. A little bit of more time this today. I might go over also what I'll do. I'll try to fit that in. Actually, going over the Treasury of Blessings liturgy. Yes, the Buddhist practice of meditation. And as somebody presenting meditation, sometimes you just think, should just not say anything. That's, in the Zen tradition, that's very often what you do. Somebody wants to know about meditation. Well, they can sit down, that's it. Find out. This is what's called shikantaze. You just sit, and then it comes to you. But of course, what is the value of sitting is that it cuts through our ordinary disconnect. So basically, the problem we have as sentient beings is that we're disconnected. What we're doing with the Abhidharma study, what we're doing with any Buddhist study is connecting, beginning to look. And with that looking, we're beginning to see. Seeing is important because it's seeing that sets us free, seeing the truth, seeing what is. And we do this not so much, and this is coming back to Husserl's and other, what were they called again? Yeah, the phenomenologists, but other, like Saussure and anyway, structuralists, I guess you can say. This whole thing of epoche, which is that you're not interested so much in saying what it is, but you're interested in taking away what prevents you from seeing. So in the Buddhist context, we're not really telling you what to see. We're not telling anyone. Buddha didn't tell us what to see. We see it ourselves, and actually what needs to be seen can only be seen by us. But what we can do is limit our confusion. And that's such an important point. The moment that we take a deep breath and we sit down, the mind becomes clearer. We needn't equip ourselves with a book of rules about what's the right and the wrong thing to do, but it's about us being clearer. Yes, sitting down and taking a deep breath, you could say that's a rule, but it's a rule that takes us beyond rules. And so meditation takes us beyond the ordinary entanglement in our muddled disconnect with reality. And so that's where awakening, it doesn't consist of new knowledge or anything. It doesn't consist of becoming a Buddhist. It doesn't consist of becoming anything that's labeled. It's simply just naked realization. But of course, to get there, we need the method. We need to sit down when somebody needs to tell us, take a deep breath and relax. And that you could say is a rule. So we have a path. We have a path and a method. We have undeniably the Buddha's word and the Buddha's path. And we trust the Buddha implicitly as somebody who sees straight, who's a guide. And that's why we take refuge in the Buddha and the teaching and those that travel with us. But in doing so, then, the practice of meditation as such is then to sit and to disentangle ourselves from our ordinary confusion and our ordinary entanglement, particularly with regards to our thoughts and what really constitutes the filters that prevent us from connecting. So we learn in the practice of meditation to be present without being entangled in thought. So it's the opposite of sitting and thinking. It's the opposite of ruminating. It's the opposite of contemplating. It's the opposite of entanglement in any conceptual practice. Of course, some meditation is contemplation. That's where we sit and ponder, but we sit and we call it meditation because we're pondering undisturbedly. So we call that contemplation. But meditation as such, what we call shamatha and vipassana, shina and hlakdong, is really just is not conceptual. It is to settle the mind and to be properly present and undistracted. And within that, insight can emerge. And of course, our education, our analysis, our realization, if you like, our insights, they become stronger when we're not carried away by engagement in what is superficial and fleeting. So our engagement at the level of an undisturbed mind is far more powerful than when we are distracted. So with the focusing of the mind, we have a much more powerful ally in the mind. This is also where the mind no longer becomes, you could say, a problem. The mind becomes an ally, to quote somebody. And in fact, this is where the sage then is at peace. But it's not just that the sage is at peace with, in the sense of being a vegetable, but the sage is at peace with beginning to see through all the confused, alienating, afflicted, anguished perspectives that come with an unpeaceful mind. So peace allows us to see what there is, and we see that it is good. That's the Buddha's enlightenment. That in fact reality is good. This is what we call basic goodness or Buddha nature. So when we're meditating, this is essentially what we wish to do effectively, to leave outside all the flim flam, the interference, and actually be able to settle that in direct focus on reality. So the method to do this, because this might sound really cool, and it might be something that we say, yeah, I subscribe to that. But to actually do it means going outside of the normal restlessness and the normal stress and the normal rather childish demands for entertainment, for being affirmed and confirmed. And that's where, when we practice meditation, it's essential that we become bored. It's essential that we're not being entertained. And that's where, especially in Vajrayana context, it's so important that we right from the start have a foundation that is about us getting to the bottom of what ails the mind, and not just finding some new ideas, new dogmas, and new practices that distract us with their exotic nature. Because if that's what really our path becomes about, then once the novelty of these methods exhaust, then they don't really seem to have any purpose anymore. Now, us, for example, um, eating well is something that we never become bored of, because eating well actually makes us feel good. So something that has lasting value, eating well, brushing our teeth, personal hygiene, and so forth, doesn't go out of fashion. It's not like, oh, I'm so over brushing my teeth. I've done that for years now. I want, I'm so tired of showering. I'm tired of looking after my personal hygiene. I want something else. That obviously we're not going to do. And so meditation is never ever going to be something that, if we do it properly, that becomes something boring. But if it's just like, wow, if we've been brought to brush our teeth just because of the color of the toothbrush or the sort of the toothpaste and so on, well, then it won't last very long. Then all of a sudden we have this situation where we're saying, I want a new method. I've been doing this for so long. I'm so bored with it. And that's because the method has only remained as an object. It hasn't actually penetrated us. And the real toxicity, the cause of suffering, is still there, wanting some new technique, some new method. And that's of course also what happens for intellectuals. There you want some new intellectual stimulation, some new ideas, some new, and it's all across the line with us, that we as dualistic, childlike sentient beings, we're looking for objects to entertain us, and yet the hunger still remains. In fact, the more we're fed, the more we want. So that's where the Buddha, appreciating our natural wealth and our natural richness, rather than sort of selling us cheap trinkets, he wanted to show us the great luminous display of our innate true nature. And that's where the path of meditation is leading us, if we would let go of our need for just being entertained. And that's where, to enter into this dimension, which is this dimension of truth, then we have to let go of the superficiality and the sort of the hunger for untruth, the hunger for just being entertained by the sort of the Netflix of our craving mind. So method has to go right. The method has to really go right down to the core of who we are. And that's where then meditation is so valuable, when it's founded on us really working with what is. And that's where the simplicity of meditation is essential, that it doesn't offer any entertainment, that enables us to be genuinely nakedly there. We can't walk into the shower dressed up. We have to take off our clothes. We have to get to the bottom of where the body odor originates from. So our spiritual odor originates from this dualistic, fixating, confused mind, and that's what we deal with. So to do that first, for us properly to take off our clothes before we go into the shower of meditation, we have to calm the mind. And it's then with that we begin to free ourselves from what sits and festers. So we do that effectively with a framework, particularly when we're talking about sitting meditation, which is sitting. But more than that, it's also then to bring the mind back from where it ordinarily runs around and creates havoc, which is the distracted mind that's going after objects. So the first thing we do with meditation is the practice of mindfulness, to bring mind back to where we are, which we can do then with the object of mindfulness being the breath, or whatever it might be. In this context, we do it with the, initially we do it with the practice of invoking the presence of the Buddha, Buddha Anusmriti. But then also we settle simply just in settling, and there we have just as reference point, we have the breath. So when we're doing the Buddha sadhana, we essentially invoke the presence of the Buddha, but then also we dissolve the reference point of the Buddha, and settling into that, which actually, thanks to that visualization and the preliminaries, then there is a particular atmosphere that's generated. And on the basis of that, we're more committed really to the sacred quality, beyond just our ordinary rational mind, and that's what we call blessings. So having done that, then we settle the mind, and we have as a, you could say, something to block us or to prevent us from getting distracted. We have the reference point of just coming back to the mind. Otherwise, we might be sitting wondering what is the nature of mind. So we come back to the breath. We relate to the breath, and we do it specifically with the out breath. And this is because it connects us beyond just ourselves. Rather than going, the focus is more on getting out of our heads than going into our heads. It's more about letting go of the cycle of our self-fixation and more engaging with the greater reality of the space around us. So that's where we don't retreat into ourselves, but we go out of ourselves. And that's where we're more focused on the out breath. So we follow the breath as it exits from our nostrils, and then dissolving into space, we relax. Again, you can't see the breath, so there's a subtle experience of the channels that we were talking about before. It falls within the channels 1 to 5, but the perception of it also is very much generated by channel 6, the mind. But the bottom line is we stay with this sense of the breath exiting and then mingling with space, and then we relax. We let the in-breath happen, and again, we're proactive in terms of the out-breath. So that's our focus. And as we're doing this, then whatever thoughts arise in the mind, whatever perceptions, memories, ideas, ruminations, etc., whether they be extraordinarily interesting or extraordinarily predictably boring or domestic or whatever, then we just recognize that these are thoughts. And again, according to this notion of epoché we were talking about before, simply just we don't necessarily let it tangle us. We say, yeah, it's there, but that's it. We don't get ourselves entangled in it. And that's where we then just simply coming back to the breath, we're able to let go of it. We're like, yeah, I know you're there. So it's like somebody who we notice, but we don't necessarily engage with them. So that's where the thoughts might have less power over us if we're willing to come back to this space of just being present without necessarily objectifying or grasping or fixating on these thoughts. So training in that is so valuable. And that is what then allows us to use the practice of shamatha as a vehicle for accomplishing vipassana. If we have, on the basis of studying Abhidharma, or if we have some confidence in the lack of inherent existence of person and also object, as per the Madhyamika teaching, if we have that, then the calm enables this insight really just to take place. It's not a conceptual insight, but it justifies our practice in simply not engaging with the assumptions that have to do with the subject and the object, with the sense of personal self or objective self. Personal self here means everything that we think of in terms of me. Objective self means what the solidity that we project onto the phenomenal world. And so the practice of just settling without grasping any of that, we can do that with the confidence that comes from having assessed that they don't possess any reality. So that is where the study of Madhyamika, the study of the middle way, and the study is also what we're doing now, they enable us actually to just feel confident and just relaxing into being present. So whatever practice we do, we always do this with what we call the three excellences, in the sense that we have the motivation, which is we want to benefit others. We have the practice, which essentially cures us of our delusion, and then whatever good there is in that, we then finally dedicate that as when we conclude the practice. So that's where, when we begin the practice, we say that, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. So we have this where we take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and also through the practice of the paramitas. Now here it says through the merit of practicing generosity and so on. That actually means the paramitas. Chinso jibe sunamji, which means Jin, generosity, so just means and so on. That actually means, this is Tibetan for it. Well, it's more than Tibetan. It just presumes that you know that it's actually saying 6 paramitas. So implicit in that are the 6 paramitas: generosity, discipline, patience, energy, meditation, and wisdom. But on the basis of that, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. That's why I'm doing it. And then we then further, consolidate that with the 4 immeasurables: wishing that all beings be happy, which is loving kindness; wishing they be free from suffering, which is compassion; wishing they never be free from joy, sacred happiness, which is sympathetic joy; and wishing that they dwell in equanimity. So that's on the basis of that. This then, you say, sets the stage. And then we visualize the Buddha, intangible yet apparent. And on the basis of that, we visualize the Buddha and surrounded by the Buddha's students. And then we actually make this very devotional supplication to the Buddha that essentially is about what we call 7 aspects, or the 7 branches: prostration, offering, confession, which means parting from our negative habits; rejoicing, requesting to teach, requesting the Buddhas to teach, requesting Buddhas not to pass into nirvana; and then dedicating. So that sort of runs over a page and a half. And then there's the supplication to the Buddha, sort of just very concise supplication to the Buddha. And this is chanted by the Tibetans would say Lama This is almost like a mantra in itself. And so then we can, in English, sorry, I go a little bit sort of Gregorian there and sort of start putting a little bit of tune to that sometimes. And then also we chant the Dharani, Teyata, and then actually the short mantra, Om Muni Muni Mahamunaya Soha. And then we do that a bit, and then at the end, then we consider that the the Buddha, with all the light of enlightenment, penetrates us, and we basically lose any sense of subject and object. And within that lack of confusion, we then consider that we have reached the state of non-returner. So of course, being ordinary dualistic beings, yeah, we will of course return, and also particularly out of compassion we re-emerge for all sentient beings. But there is the level of having no longer being at the mercy of confusion, and that's what we take with us. So we settle into that for a while, and then we conclude with some prayers of dedication. And why I'm sort of at the end we chant this Maitreya aspiration is because it really is a very beautiful liturgy, and it sort of covers the sort of the greatness of the Mahayana path. There's some of the lines in here that sometimes are a little bit maybe sort of obscure. You might sort of be, according to the great sages, there are no sentient beings, no truly existent sentient beings, no life force. We're not saying that we're not here. Obviously, this is we're talking about the Buddhas, right? We're already talking about somebody that exists, the sages. But similarly with us, but we're just saying that the stuff that keeps us here and keeps us confused, the notion of truly existent self, and what comes with it, the whole sort of notion of, you know, something that is sustaining that. That's what we're saying. It doesn't actually possess a self. There's no self-presence within the actual nature of reality. And having that, what we call view, then all the practices of the paramitas, which are then enumerated, the practice of generosity, the practice of discipline, etc., then they make perfect sense. And then we just simply, at the end, we aspire that we may follow the example of the great bodhisattvas like Maitreya. And then there's a few prayers of dedication, and finally this chant from the way of the bodhisattva. So I get that. This is my image to illustrate relativity. Yeah, it's equally true that it's a 6 and a 9. Okay, I think it is. Okay, we'll just take a 1-minute break and then we'll start the practice. Thank you. In the Samadhi Sutra, it said, those who while walking, sitting, standing, or sleeping recollect the moon-like Buddha will always be in the Buddha's presence and will attain the vast nirvana. And his pure body is the color of gold. Beautiful is the protector of the world. Whoever visualizes him like this practices the meditation of the bodhisattvas. In keeping with this, we should practice remembering our incomparable teacher, the Lord of Sages, in the following way. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I attain enlightenment. Through the merit of practicing generosity and so on, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I attain enlightenment. Through the merit of practicing generosity and so on, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I attain enlightenment. Through the merit of practicing generosity and so on, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. May all sentient beings enjoy happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the sacred happiness devoid of suffering. And may they dwell in boundless equanimity that is free from attachment and aversion. As the union of unborn emptiness and the ceaseless appearances of interdependence, magically there appears before me in the sky, amidst vast clouds of offerings, on a jewel lion throne, in lotus sun and moon disk seats, the incomparable teacher, lion of the Shakyas. His body the color of gold, adorned with major and minor marks, clad in the 3 Dharma robes, he sits in Vajra posture. His right hand gracefully poised in the earth-touching mudra, and his left hand in the gesture of meditation holding an alms bowl full of nectar. Like a mountain of gold magnificent, he shines in splendor, spreading beams of wisdom light across the whole expanse of space. The 8 close suns, 16 elders and the like, a vast ocean-like retinue of noble beings encircles him all around. Simply think of him and he grants the glory of the highest bliss, liberation from samsara and nirvana, the 2 extremes. He is the great being, perfect embodiment of every source of refuge. With your great compassion, you embraced this turbulent and degenerate world and made 500 mighty aspirations. You are as exalted as the white lotus. Whoever hears your name shall never return to samsara. Most compassionate teacher, to you I pay homage. All my own and others' virtues of body, speech, and mind, together with all our possessions, visualized like Samantabhadra's offering clouds, I offer to you. All the harmful actions and transgressions I have committed throughout beginningless time, each and every one, I now confess with intense and heartfelt regret. In all virtuous actions of the noble ones and ordinary beings, accumulated throughout the past, present, and future, I rejoice. Turn the wheel of the profound and vast Dharma teachings ceaselessly and in every direction, I pray. Your wisdom body is like space and remains changeless throughout past, present, and future. Yet in the perception of those to be guided, you go through the display of birth and death. Even so, let your form body continue always to appear. Through all the virtues I have accumulated in the past, am accumulating now, and will accumulate in the future, for the sake of benefiting all beings who are as infinite as space. May you, the sovereign of Dharma, be forever pleased, and may all attain the state of the victorious one, the Lord of Dharma. Living beings like us, adrift in this degenerate age, have no guidance nor protection. Because of your kindness, caring for us with surpassing compassion, every manifestation in this world now of the 3 jewels is your enlightened activity. You are then our only refuge, incomparable, supreme. So from our hearts we pray with total confidence and faith. Do not neglect the great promises you made in times gone by, but hold us until we attain enlightenment with your compassion. Supreme Teacher Bhagavan, Tathagata Arhat, complete and perfect Buddha, glorious conqueror Shakyamuni Buddha, to you I pay homage, to you I make offerings, in you I take refuge. Supreme Teacher Bhagavan, Tathagata Arhat, complete and perfect Buddha, glorious conqueror Shakyamuni Buddha, to you I pay homage, to you I make offerings, in you I take refuge. Supreme Teacher Bhagavan, Tathagata Arhat, complete and perfect Buddha, glorious conqueror Shakyamuni Buddha, to you I pay homage, to you I make offerings, in you I take refuge. Deyado Muni Muni Mahamunaya Soha. 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 Om 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 Muni Muni Mahamunaya Soha. Muni Muni Mamana, Om 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 Muni Muni Mamana. Om Muni Muni Mamana, Soha. From the Buddha's body, there emanates a great radiance, a multicolored rays of wisdom light, dispelling all our own and others' obscurations, and causing all the genuine qualities of the Mahayana path to rise within us, so that we attain the level of perfection, from which we will never return again to samsara. The miraculous display of the unsurpassable wisdom appears as the intentions, deeds, prayers, knowledge, love, and ability of all the Sugatas and their children. May all beings become exactly like them. I prostrate to all the Buddhas and to the Bodhisattvas endowed with the divine eye of the sages and to the Shravakas as well. I prostrate to Bodhicitta, which counteracts birth in all lower realms, perfectly shows the path to the higher realms and leads to no aging nor death. Whatever negative actions I have done under the influence of an afflicted mind, in the presence of the Buddhas, I fully acknowledge them all. By the accumulation of any merit I have created through the three kinds of activities, may my seed of omniscience grow, and may I attain awakening that never ends. Whatever offerings to the Buddhas that can be found in realms of the 10 directions are known to the Buddhas who rejoice in them. I rejoice in all these offerings. I fully acknowledge all negative actions and rejoice in all merit. I prostrate to all the Buddhas, may I attain supreme primordial wisdom. I earnestly request the Bodhisattvas who reside on the 10 levels, in all the direction of the worlds and the 10 directions, to awaken into supreme enlightenment. Once you have awakened into genuine enlightenment and tamed the Maras and their hordes, may you turn the wheel of Dharma so that all living beings may be healed. With the sound of the great Dharma drum, may you free all sentient beings who are suffering. Throughout inconceivable millions of kalpas, may you remain and teach the Dharma. Mired in the swamp of desire, entangled in the strands of cyclic existence, I am fettered by all that binds. I supplicate those, supreme among humans, to look upon me. The Buddhas do not blame sentient beings who are flawed. With a loving heart for all sentient beings, may the Buddhas free them from the ocean of cyclic existence. Any perfect Buddhas who are present, those who have passed away and those yet to come, may I train following in their way and engage in enlightened conduct. Having perfected the 6 paramitas, may I liberate the 6 families of sentient beings. Having actualized the 6 extraordinary faculties, may I reach unexcelled enlightenment. Future phenomena are not born, and those past will not occur. Present phenomena have no inherent nature. There is no actual location. There is no perception. There are no outer things. May I realize the Dhammadhatu of emptiness. According to the Buddhas, the great sages, there are no truly existent sentient beings, no life forms. There is no truly existent individual and no nurturing of a self. May I realize the Dhammatā where the self is not present. An entity such as grasping on to a self in mind is not present within any of the paramitas. To benefit all sentient beings, may I give with generosity, free of avarice. Since things do not exist as entities, may my wealth appear spontaneously. Since all things totally disintegrate, may I perfect the paramita of generosity. Endowed with a flawless ethics that is guided by rules and an ethics that is completely pure. With an ethics free of an arrogant mind, may I perfect the paramita of ethics. Just as the elements of earth, water, fire, and wind. Bodhisattvas do not remain caught by mental constructs. By attaining patience, anger never rises. May I perfect the paramita of patience. Through the power of previous perseverance, having become stable, enthusiastic, and free of laziness, and through a strong body and mind, may I perfect the paramita of perseverance. Through the samadhi where all is illusion-like, through the samadhi of the hero's strife, and through the samadhi that is like a vajra, may I perfect the paramita of meditative concentration. Through actualizing the 3 gates of full liberation, the equal nature of the 3 times, and the 3 types of knowing as well, may I perfect the paramita of prajna. Through persevering in a bodhisattva's practice, may I attain the kaya praised by all the Buddhas, the luminous kaya and the kaya blazing with majesty. Thus may my intention be fulfilled. May I be like the famed Maitreya who engaged in such a practice, perfected the paramitas, and perfectly abides at the zenith of the 10th level. By this merit may all attain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may all beings be free. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, rise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen, may it never fail, but grow and flourish ever more and more. May the Buddha appear in this world. May the light of the teaching shine like the sun. May the holders of the teaching live in harmony, and thus may all be auspicious for the teaching to endure. We pray for the good health of the teachers. We pray for their precious lives to be long. We pray for their activities to spread and increase. May we be blessed never to part from the teachers. Akashasya stiti yavat yavacha jagata stiti tavan mama stiti bhuyaha jagadukani nignataha. Akashasya stiti yavat Yavacha jagataha stiti tavan mama stiti bhuyahan jagadukhani ninataha tavan mama stiti bhuyahan jagadukhani ninataha tavan mama stiti bhuyahan jagadukhani ninataha. As long as space remains, as long as the world remains, may I too remain to alleviate the sufferings of the world. Thank you very much for joining us here. Couple of announcements. Tomorrow at 7 p.m. online, there will be a practice of Sok, short Guru Rinpoche sadhana, called the Rain of Blessings. And that's at 7. And if you're on the SI mailing list, you should have received the link. And also, I should remind you that every morning we do this practice here actually at 7:30. It's prefaced by already at 7, we chant the Heart Sutra, and then we do sitting meditation for 20 minutes. That's from 7 to roughly 7:30. And then we do this practice we just did from 7:30 to just before 8. There the emphasis is more on chanting the mantra. But that's every day, so you can join us for both these programs, or one, anyway, between 7 and 8. And then also for those of you who are practitioners of sadhana, having received empowerment and all of that, then I'm going to be doing something on Saturday from 10 to 12, which is going through a text actually by, I can't remember which one's first, but either the third Dorubchen or Dinghuchen Rinpoche's root teacher, Shichen Gyaltsa, basically explaining all the components of development stage practice when we do sadhana. So just to let you know, there's probably some other things that I've forgotten, but anyway, just to remind you what I can remember, and also if you're on the Siddhartha Intent mailing list, you will have received all this information. Can you point out the file of this prayer document that is saved in the folder? I think it's up there. Yeah, if it's the sadhana we did here, it's there. Yes, the sadhana link will be recorded. And the link is you would have received that in I think actually a mail that went out today. So the Zoom link should be in there. Yeah. Okay. See you soon. Take care.